You thought we wouldn't meet again, but here we are. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is The Advocate, and tonight I'm an advocate for The Hero of Ages, a book review. Written by Brandon Sanderson and released on October 14, 2008, The Hero of Ages serves as the third and final book in the Mistborn Era 1 trilogy. Now, something that I've come to learn from my experience in reading books and watching TV shows is that ending a series is tricky business. More often than not, writers don't exactly stick the landing when it comes to concluding their story arcs, as years of hype and fan-created theories preceding the final entry in any series can bring unwieldy expectations that a final book pretty much has no chance on arrival. So with that said, does Sanderson masterfully conclude the Mistborn Era 1 trilogy in an arc that feels both logical and satisfying? Or does The Hero of Ages crack under the pressure of two good books worth of build-up and then nothing in the end? Well, you'll just have to watch on and find out. Now, if you've not read the first two books in the series, Mistborn: The Final Empire and The Well of Ascension, then what are you doing here? Go and read those books, you goofy goof. Then after you're done reading, go and watch my video reviews pertaining to those books, as we will be discussing events regarding The Final Empire and The Well of Ascension in the first part of this video. After that, we will be discussing spoilers for The Hero of Ages in the second part of this video, so heads up. However, before we get into the nitty-gritty of this book, I would like to just ask a huge favor of you guys. If you guys could leave me a like and let me know what your guys' thoughts are with regards to The Hero of Ages. Not only do I like hearing your guys' thoughts and interacting with you guys in the comment section as well, but your comments really help me out a lot with regards to the very unforgiving YouTube algorithm and getting this video potentially a little bit more noticed. I would really appreciate it, guys. So, with all that out of the way, let's mosey. After reading The Final Empire and The Well of Ascension, you as a reader are probably familiar enough with Sanderson's storytelling and writing style to know whether or not you're going to like The Hero of Ages. This to say that if you like the first two books in the series, you're probably going to like this one. If you dislike the first two books in the series, but for some reason kept reading in hopes that maybe the story will get better in the final book, you're not going to like this one. This is clearly a continuation of the Mistborn story. Although several arcs from the previous books do reach their climax in The Hero of Ages, there's nothing here that is a drastic change from those books, in neither a stylistic nor literary sense. This is pretty much a what you see is what you get kind of situation. And I think the most tangible reflection of this lies within Sanderson's prose. Sanderson writes his books with the intention of telling a story in the most minimalistic, utilitarian way possible. There's no metering or rhyming structure here, it's just standard, occasionally decent prose. The writing is actually not too dissimilar to that of a young adult book. So if the lack of poetic detail in his writing bothered you in the first two books, then it's going to bother you here because the syntax, for the most part, remains unchanged. Here are a couple of examples.
The Harrows was clogged with a disorderly mash of wood and cloth and bodies. Shacks leaned on shacks, buildings leaned precariously against earth and rock, and the entire mess piled on top of itself, creeping up the canal walls toward the dark sky above. Here and there, people slept under only a dirty sheet stretched between two bits of urban flotsam, their millennium-old fear of the mists giving way before simple necessity. The entire chamber was crafted from white marble of various shades. While it was large enough to hold hundreds of people, plus a dance floor and tables, it still felt intimate. The room was divided by rows of ornamental marble pillars, and it was further partitioned with large stained glass panels that ran from floor to ceiling. Other authors might take the opportunity to describe a pattern of moss on the earth and rocks, or even detail the various unique color hues on the stained glass walls. But as we've covered in my previous videos, Sanderson is only interested in giving you the baseline amount of information you need in picturing the scene in your head. He doesn't much care for giving you more information than what is needed. Now in the past, readers have criticized Brandon for his pragmatic and subjectively non-pretty way of telling a story. And that's completely okay, as we all enjoy different things about the books we read. Personally, although it took some growing on me, I eventually grew to appreciate Brandon's storytelling style despite the fact that it was lacking some detail. However, if you as a reader are hoping that Brandon's writing all of a sudden drastically improved in its ability to convey detail simply because this is the conclusion to his big trilogy, then you're going to be disappointed because that definitely isn't the case here. Now, this fairly prosaic writing style does play to Sanderson's advantage in one key instance. However, the content of that moment is pretty spoilerific, so we'll discuss that later on in this video.
Now, when it comes to the story and a rather spoiler-free summary of said story, the Hero of Ages actually takes place about 1 year after the events of the Well of Ascension. After Vin was misled into opening the Well of Ascension and releasing a destructive force known as Ruin, our two main characters, Vin and Ellen, decide to go on a worldwide tour to seek out 5 different caches located all over the Final Empire. The storage caches were left behind by the Lord Ruler and may provide clues for our heroes in not only defeating Ruin, but also saving the world. Now, one of the things that became readily apparent to me at the start was that this book has the highest stakes out of the entire trilogy. We're in the endgame here, so it only makes sense that our characters are in some serious peril. And although Sanderson's writing stays rather low on the use of adjectives, Sanderson does a serviceable enough job in describing the worsening and worsening conditions in the Final Empire as we begin to reach the end of the book.
Tensoon sat on his haunches, horrified. Ash rained down like shards of a broken sky, floating, making the very air look pocked and sickly. Although he sat atop a windswept hill, a layer of ash around him smothered the plant life there. Some trees had branches broken by the weight of repeated ash pileups.
This desperate winner-take-all struggle also gives our main characters an excuse to travel around the world and finally show us what else there is out there in the Final Empire. One of my quibbles with the previous 2 books is that although we were told that this story takes place in an empire, we really didn't see an empire. The story was pretty much just Luthadale and Luthadale alone. However, in this book, without delving too deeply into spoilers, we finally get to immerse ourselves into the lifestyles and going-ons of different cities around the Final Empire. Admittedly, these aren't the culturally deepest towns, but it is interesting to finally venture off and see what else is out there beyond the walls of Luthadale. And the way we go about seeing all those towns is through the vast number of POV characters we have on the roster. You see, it's not just Vin and Ellen here and the occasional Seiza chapter thrown in between. Oh no. We have a total of 10 POV characters this time around, with some characters from the previous 2 books being promoted to POV roles. And these characters are spread out all across the Final Empire, making the Hero of Ages the most expansive book in the trilogy. Now, typically when you have a book with this large of a cast, there tends to be a few characters you find more interesting than others. And although that is also the case here, I didn't personally find there to be a weak link in the story. There wasn't a situation where I went, ugh, not this character again. I was interested in all these characters and wanted to know more about each and every one of their respective mini-adventures. Now, when it comes to character changes compared to the previous books, there are a couple, and the big one that definitely comes to mind is with regards to Mr. Ellen Venture. Now, I'll try to keep things rather brief here as I want to avoid going too deeply into spoiler territory, but the Ellen character does get buffed significantly off-page, especially when compared to how we saw him at the end of the last book, and it's a bit of a jarring change. I eventually got used to this new and improved Ellen, but it did take me out from the story for a bit.
He ducked forward, striking. The Koloss anticipated the move and tried to bring its weapon down on his head, but Ellen reached out and pulled on the sword of another Koloss, throwing that creature off balance and allowing 2 of Ellen's men to slay it, and also pulling Ellen to the side. He barely evaded his opponent's weapon. Then, as he spun in the air, he flared pewter and struck. He sheared completely through the beast's leg at the knee, toppling it to the ground. Vin always said that Ellen's allomantic power was unusually strong. Ellen didn't have enough experience with allomancy to judge that, but the force of his own swing sent him stumbling. He managed to regain his footing, then took off the creature's head.
I think it would have been much better for the story if we got to see Ellen's evolution into an adept Mistborn fighter over time, rather than just being told that Ellen got good over the 1-year time gap between the Well of Ascension and the Hero of Ages. Now, to be fair, I think Sanderson probably did think about this, but he must have felt that it would have been too much of a time sink to devote pages to Ellen coming to grips with his Mistborn powers when the story is already packed. However, I think Sanderson could have skillfully married both Ellen's growth and the main cache hunting story rather seamlessly without bloating the book, and the story would have been better for it. As is, Ellen's character is inconsistent from book to book. Now, on the topic of Mistborn powers, one of the things that Sanderson does in fact excel at is writing a very good magic action scene. The number one thing I was looking forward to at the end of the Well of Ascension was reading Ellen and Vin partake in some allomantically awesome tag team battles, and that is indeed the case here, as in addition to the battle I just quoted, There are a few other action set pieces here that display Sanderson's strengths in allowing his hard magic system to work wonders through Vin and Elend, and it's a thrill to read through. On top of that, Sanderson finds even more ways to add layers to his metal-infused magic system that permeates this universe, and every time he does, I'm like, wow, how did we go this long without this new way of doing metallurgy? Sanderson incrementally adds more and more rules and ways to bend the rules of his hard magic system with each passing book that never becomes stale in my very subjective opinion. There's a fine line between making your fantasy magic system be complex enough to be interesting without convoluting it too much to the point of making your system difficult to understand for the average reader, and this book trilogy successfully maintains that balance throughout. I also appreciate how Sanderson doesn't abuse his magic system for the purposes of Deus Ex Machina. It's not a situation here where a character's in trouble, but then at the last second they pull off some miraculous, never-before-seen magic power that was not previously made known to the reader. The characters rely solely on the magic powers that have been made known to the reader, and there is no last-second BS here. Again, what you see is what you get. But with all that said, ladies and gentlemen, I think we've hit a Luthadale-sized wall here with regards to how much I can speak about the Hero of Ages, because this is the part where we delve into spoilers. If you haven't read the Hero of Ages, please click on the timestamps below to skip ahead to the conclusion of this video to hear my overall thoughts with regards to this book and trilogy in general. However, if you have read the Hero of Ages, then stick around because this is where we spoil stuff. So I think the best place to start here is ironically with the ending itself, because there's a lot to unpack there. In essence, Vin and Ellen sacrifice themselves to destroy the Vapor Soul and corporeal Atium form of Ruin, respectively, which allows Sazed to adopt the powers of Ruin and Preservation and become the Hero of Ages and, as crazy as it sounds, god of a new reborn world. I mean, that sure escalated quickly. So all in all, I think I liked the ending, but I won't lie, it did get a little wacky for me there at certain points, especially when Vin ascends to godhood and her and Ruin are outside the realm of the world and they're doing this crazy battle with each other. I don't know, it's just a little too crazy for my liking, but I suppose it's a natural escalation of events, especially considering all the crazy stuff we had already seen prior to this point. In addition, despite the tragedy of Vin's sacrifice, which I'm not taking anything away from as it is a very well written scene, I did see her death coming from a mile away, especially with how much attention Sanderson was specifically devoting to her character in specific scenes, more so than in previous books.
Vin looked up into his eyes and they returned to the dance. Neither spoke, they simply let the wonder of the moment hold them. It was a surreal experience for Vin. Their army was outside, the ash was falling perpetually and the mists were killing people. Yet within this room of white marble and sparkling colors, she danced with the man she loved for the first time.
Despite the wonder of the occasion, there's an almost sense of finality here that made me realize, yeah, Vin isn't going to make it through the end of the book. Something's going to happen here at the end where Vin will die and these two will not see the book out together. Well, I was half right. But I was also half wrong, because these two do finish the book together, albeit both of them holding hands post-mortem as Ellen doesn't survive either, which I did not see coming. Oh boy, I was sad, but also a very well done death scene, because despite the tragedy, it made sense within the context of the story. It made sense that both Vin and Ellen would make the choice to sacrifice themselves to kill Ruin if it meant saving the world and saving their friends. It also makes sense from a narrative perspective as both Vin and Elend had already completed their character arcs in the previous book. By this point in the trilogy, both Vin and Elend are fully developed characters already who are 100% Mistborn adept fighters. This book is essentially a victory lap for their already completed arcs. This book is more or less about Sazed, Tensoon, and Spook completing their character arcs as they have quite a story to tell. Sazed especially has quite a character transformation as his character goes from an atheist struggling with his non-belief to an outright god of the universe, which is quite an arc. It's a seamless transition as Sazed over time finally comes to grips with the fact that religion isn't as easy to discern as he would like it to be. It's a very mature view of religion, and although Sanderson isn't the best when it comes to describing detail in his worlds, he does definitely handle big thematic elements for his stories, as the theme of religion is handled with relative grace.
As he read their words over again in his mind, he began to see something. The faiths he had examined couldn't be divorced from the people who had adhered to them. In the abstract, those religions were stale. However, as he read the words of the people, really read them, he began to see patterns. Why did they believe? Because they saw miracles. Events one person took as happenstance, a person of faith took as a sign. A loved one recovering from a disease, a fortunate business deal, a chance meeting with a long-lost friend. It wasn't the grand doctrines of the sweeping ideals that seemed to make believers out of people. It was the simple magic in the world around them.
Now, part of Sazed's character comes from Sanderson's upbringing as a devout Mormon, as his beliefs sort of bleed through the text here. And it's very interesting how Sanderson's faith sort of builds this firm foundation for Sazed's character arc. When Sanderson was quizzed in an interview to expand on his thoughts about religion in his works, Sanderson had this to say.
I don't set out to put anything specifically Mormon into my books, but who I am definitely influences what I write and how I write it. Regardless of a person's beliefs, I think they would have to admit that religion and spirituality has played a large part in our development as a people. It's a very important thing to so many of us, and I also think that for most of us, our beliefs are nowhere near as simple as they seem when viewed from the outside. There's a real line to walk in expressing a character's religious views without letting them sound preachy. The goal is to make the character real, but not bore the reader.
Now, Sazed isn't the only one who goes through a character journey, as Spook himself also does quite a bit of developing. In the previous book, Spook was pretty much a one-note character who I couldn't really get a good read on. But here he goes on a solo stealth mission where he ventures off to Orto and even becomes a vigilante superhero for a while there. His growth from being a background character to being not only a prominent POV, but a POV who has a remarkable character journey in a rather interesting part of the world is a testament to Sanderson's new strides in the character building department. Not to mention, Spook comes across like a total badass when he becomes the first character in the book to remove his spike when he realizes that his vision of Kelsier is not what it seems. And then Spook musters forth his dwindling metal reserves to rush forth into a burning ministry building and saves Urto by flooding the canals. I was like, yes, what a character journey. Well done, Spook. That's fantastic. Spook's story, in addition to Vin's, also plays a lot with the plot twist of Ruin being able to manipulate anyone as long as they carry one of Ruin's spikes. And it's a great twist. I admittedly should have seen it coming, due to how much time Sazed, who is the narrator voicing the little mini prologues at the start of every chapter, was spending talking about hemalurgy and its intended uses in this universe, but it's a logical revelation to something that has been heavily foreshadowed since the first book. Now, I couldn't find any confirmation on this, so if you are aware, definitely please let me know down in the comments section below, but based on my inference, I think Brandon Sanderson originally intended for the first Mistborn book to be a standalone book, kind of similar to Star Wars, and then the follow-up books / follow-up movies were kind of retconned around the events of the first book / movie. However, if that is the case, then it's incredible to me that Sanderson had the foresight to know what events in the first book would constitute as big questions which would then receive big-time answers in this book, because we get some huge plot twist reveals. The fact that a tiny earring would play such a pivotal role in the series and was the reason why Vin could hear Reen's voice this entire time was such a huge mind-blown reveal that I was like, wow, did Sanderson plan this Ruin Spike earring reveal from the very beginning? Because I really don't know, but regardless of that, it's fantastic.
When you're alone, no one can betray you. A voice whispered in the back of her mind. Reen's voice. The voice she heard sometimes. Almost real. Like a conscience. She'd taken it for granted that the voice was just part of her psyche. Something left over from Reen's teachings. An instinct. Anyone will betray you, Vin, the voice said, repeating a bit of advice it commonly gave. As it spoke, it slowly slid from Reen's voice into that of Ruin. Anyone. I've always been with you. You've heard me in your mind since your first years of life.
In fact, a lot of these plot twists are really well done. The Koloss being formerly deceased humans, thus playing into the foreshadowing of the Koloss leader being named Human. Alendi reading a false prophecy that had been changed by Ruin in order to try to trick Alendi into releasing Ruin from the Well of Ascension, thus recontextualizing Rashek's murder of Alendi as not that of betrayal but of a necessary evil. The mists being preservation's mechanism in order to allow people a fighting chance against Ruin. It's all very well written and thought out. Now, I know I've been gushing a lot about these twists in this book in general, but I do have a couple of complaints. And they are with regards to the consequences from said twists and how they pertain to the roles that Tensoon and Marsh play in the story. Marsh's journey throughout the book is a bit disappointing to say the least. He does have a little mini moment close to the end of the story where he finally kind of regains his humanity a bit and he decides to remove Vin's spike, thus ultimately saving Vin and allowing her to ascend to godhood, but at the end of the day he ultimately remains a puppet for Ruin and he never really gets a redemption arc. Tensoon I was really disappointed by. He is my favorite character in the series, but he ultimately receives an off-screen death when he and the Conjurer decide to remove their spikes in order to remove themselves from Ruin's control, and it just feels rather lackluster, especially considering his prominence in the story. I mean, yes, we're ultimately told that all the Kandra eventually became ordinary Mistrates after they removed their blessings, but I would have liked if we would have had a final moment with Tensoon before he dies. It would have done justice to his character. As is, it just feels half-baked and kind of disappointing. But I guess at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter because we still receive a very satisfying ending. And after all is said and done and all the twists have been revealed, we are left with the powerful image of Spook and his ragtag group of survivors surveying a new reborn world full of color. It feels special because Sanderson, for the first time in the series, finally overcomes this minimalistic approach and delves into adjectives to describe the scene in front of us. It's a powerful ending.
Spook froze as he caught sight of a bit of color in the grass. He held up a hand, warning the others, and they stepped forward more quietly. There, in the center of the grass, was a field of somethings. Growing from the ground with tops like bright-colored leaves, they were in the shape of upside-down bells, perched on long, straight stalks, the petals open toward the sun, as if reaching for its light and gaping to drink it in.
It's a worthy conclusion for our characters, for our readers, and for Sanderson as well, who I feel improved as a writer with each passing book and finally gave us the detailed color we were all waiting for, both in the universe and in his written prose. So all in all, I thought the Hero of Ages and the Mistborn trilogy in general was a worthy read. And if you can overcome the prose, which admittedly does take some growing, I think you're in store for a fantastic story and a great trilogy. But from the bottom of my heart, thank you ladies and gentlemen so very much for watching this video. I can't thank you enough. If you like this review, if you could do me a huge solid and consider subscribing to my channel. As we've discussed before, the YouTube algorithm is very unfriendly towards smaller channels, so your subscriptions, comments, and likes definitely help me out a ton in terms of discoverability. I would really appreciate it, guys. Thank you so much. I'm definitely going to revisit Sanderson again in the future, but for now I'd like to step away from the Cosmere for a bit and check out a different author and series, which I've been keen to check out, so I hope you guys look forward to that. And until we meet again, The Advocate, out.